Jake Thornton had never expected his life to change the day the train pulled into Dusty Creek Station. At 23 years old, he was the last virgin cowboy in 3 counties, or so his brothers loved to remind him. While other men chased women at the saloon, Jake buried himself in work at the family ranch, too awkward and shy to even speak to a lady without turning red as a summer sunset. His pa had died last winter, leaving Jake alone on 200 acres with nobody but cattle for company. The loneliness ate at him worse than any hunger. That's when his late mother's sister, Aunt Beatrice, took matters into her own capable hands. Without asking permission, she'd arranged a mail-order bride for him through some European agency she'd read about in a ladies' magazine. Jake protested violently when the letter arrived. He couldn't take care of a wife. He didn't know the first thing about women. He'd never even kissed a girl, for crying out loud. But Beatrice was insistent, and the arrangements were already made. The bride was already on her way from somewhere in Scandinavia, paid for and promised. Now, standing on that platform with his hat clutched nervously in both hands, Jake watched passengers step down from the train cars. Regular folks. Normal-sized folks. His eyes scanned for a woman traveling alone, perhaps with a trunk or two, looking lost in a foreign land. Then he saw her. She had to duck to exit the train car, bending almost in half to fit through the doorway. When she straightened to her full height on the platform, Jake's jaw went slack. The woman stood at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe 8. She was a giantess, towering over every person at the station like a mountain among hills. Her blonde hair was braided and coiled around her head like a crown. Her shoulders were broad as a man's, her arms thick with muscle, and her body was built solid and strong. She wore a simple blue dress that must have required enough fabric to make 3 normal dresses. Her face was beautiful in a fierce, Nordic way, with high cheekbones and ice-blue eyes that swept across the crowd with obvious uncertainty. She carried a single massive trunk under one arm like it weighed nothing at all. Their eyes met across the platform. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. This couldn't be right. There had to be some mistake. But she was walking toward him now, her heavy footsteps making the wooden boards creak beneath her weight. People scattered out of her path, staring openly at the spectacle. She stopped in front of him, blocking out the sun. Jake had to crane his neck back to meet her eyes. He was a respectable 5'9", but he barely reached her chest. "You are Jake Thornton?" she asked in a thick accent, her voice surprisingly soft for someone her size. "Why yes'm," Jake stammered. "I reckon I am." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she set down her trunk with a heavy thump that shook the platform. "I am Ingrid Halvorsen. From Norway. I am your bride." Jake's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them helpful. What would people say? How would this even work? She could probably pick him up and snap him like a twig if she wanted to. But beneath his panic, he noticed something else in her eyes. She looked tired. Scared, even. She'd traveled thousands of miles to a strange country to marry a complete stranger, and now that stranger was staring at her like she was some kind of circus attraction. His mama had raised him to be a gentleman, if nothing else. Jake swallowed hard and offered his hand. "Welcome to Dusty Creek, Miss Halvorsen. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." Her face softened just a fraction. She took his hand in hers, and her grip was warm and careful, like she was afraid she might break him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It was very long." "Well then," Jake said, picking up his courage along with her trunk, which he could barely lift with both arms, "let's get you home." As they walked toward his wagon, Jake's mind spun with one terrifying question: what in God's name had Aunt Beatrice gotten him into? The wagon ride back to the ranch was the longest 30 minutes of Jake's life. Ingrid sat beside him on the bench seat, which groaned under her weight, and he was acutely aware of how small he felt next to her. Every bump in the road pressed their shoulders together, and each time it happened, Jake flinched like he'd touched a hot stove. She didn't speak much, just gazed out at the Texas landscape with those pale blue eyes. Jake tried to make conversation a few times, commenting on the weather and the land, but his voice kept cracking nervously. He sounded like a boy going through puberty all over again. When they finally arrived at the ranch house, Ingrid climbed down from the wagon with surprising grace for someone her size. She stood in the yard, surveying the modest wooden house, the barn, the fenced pastures with cattle grazing in the distance. Jake watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "But it's honest work and honest land." "It is good," Ingrid said simply. "In Norway, my family had less. Much less." That surprised him. "Why'd you leave, if you don't mind my asking?" Her expression darkened. "In my village, I was too different. Too big. People feared me. Mothers pulled children away when I walked past. Men looked at me like I was a monster. She turned those fierce eyes on him. The agency said in America, people want strong wives for frontier. They said someone would want me for what I can do, not hate me for what I am. The pain in her voice hit Jake square in the chest. He knew something about being different, about not fitting in. Well, he said softly, I can't say I'm not scared. But I'm not hateful. That much I can promise you. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. That is enough. For now. They went inside, and Jake showed her the small house. There were only 4 rooms, a kitchen and sitting area, a bedroom that had been his parents', and a smaller room that had been his. A washroom in the back completed the modest home. You can have the big bedroom, Jake said quickly. I'll take the small one. I don't want you to think that just because we're married on paper, I expect anything. I know we're strangers. Ingrid looked at him with something like curiosity. You do not want to share bed? This is strange for marriage, yes. Jake's face burned hot enough to fry eggs. I just thought we could take things slow. Get to know each other first. I see. She sat down on the sofa, which creaked alarmingly under her. This is good. I am tired from travel. But Jake, I must tell you something important. He sat across from her, his hat still in his hands. What is it? She leaned forward, her massive hands clasped together. The agency, they told me American men want mail-order brides for certain reasons. For cooking, cleaning, for bearing children. For companionship in all ways. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I have been alone my whole life. 26 years old and no man has ever wanted me. No man has ever touched me. I want to know what it is like to be wanted. To be desired. To feel what other women feel. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. I understand that, Miss Halverson. I truly do. Do you? She looked at him intensely. Because I must ask you something direct. In my culture, we do not hide behind pretty words. We speak truth. She took a deep breath. Can you make me come to this ranch and feel like a real woman? Can you make me feel pleasure? Can you make me feel loved? The question hung in the air between them like lightning before a storm. Jake's mouth went dry. His palms were sweating. This was it, the moment where he had to be honest, even if it made him sound like a complete fool. I've got to be straight with you, Ingrid, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how. I've never been with a woman before. Never even kissed one properly. I'm probably the worst choice you could have gotten for a husband in that regard. He expected her to be angry, or disappointed, or disgusted. Instead, something unexpected happened. Ingrid smiled, a real genuine smile that transformed her entire face. Then we are the same, she said. Both unwanted. Both inexperienced. Both hoping for something better. I reckon so, Jake admitted. Then perhaps, Ingrid said slowly, we can learn together. No shame. No judgment. Just 2 people trying to find happiness in this strange arrangement. She extended her massive hand. Do we have agreement? Jake looked at her hand, then at her face. Behind all that strength and size, he saw vulnerability. He saw hope. He saw someone who wanted exactly what he wanted, to be accepted for who they were. He took her hand and shook it firmly. We have an agreement. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake was the beginning of something neither had dared to dream possible. The first week of marriage was awkward as a newborn calf trying to walk. Jake and Ingrid circled each other like cautious animals, polite and distant, sleeping in separate rooms and barely speaking beyond necessity. But slowly, things began to shift. Ingrid proved to be everything the agency had promised and more. She woke before dawn and worked alongside Jake with a strength that left him amazed. She could lift fence posts he struggled with, could gentle a stubborn horse with surprising tenderness, and could outwork any ranch hand he'd ever employed. By the end of the first week, she'd repaired the barn roof, cleared brush from the north pasture, and fixed the broken water pump, all while keeping the house cleaner than it had been since his mother passed. But it was the small moments that got to Jake. The way she hummed Norwegian songs while cooking. How she left wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. The gentle way she'd started saying good morning to him, her accent making the simple words sound like music. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. Ingrid was mending one of Jake's shirts, her large fingers surprisingly nimble with the needle and thread. In Norway, she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, there are stories about women like me. Jotun, They call them giants. Some stories say they are monsters. Others say they are magical beings. As a child, I wanted to be magical. But I only ever felt like a monster. Jake set down the piece of leather he'd been working. You're not a monster, Ingrid. Not even close. You are kind to say this. But I see how you still keep distance from me. How you are nervous when we are close. She didn't sound angry, just sad. I understand. I am too much for you. Something in Jake snapped. Maybe it was the loneliness in her voice, or maybe it was the fact that he'd spent 7 days watching this incredible woman work herself to exhaustion trying to be worthy of acceptance. He stood up and walked over to where she sat, positioning himself directly in front of her. Even sitting, she was nearly at his eye level. Now you listen here, he said firmly. I'm not nervous because you're too much. I'm nervous because I don't want to disappoint you. I'm nervous because I don't know how to be a good husband. I'm nervous because every time I look at you, I feel things I've never felt before, and I don't know what to do with them. Ingrid's eyes widened. What kind of things? Jake's courage was running out fast, but he pushed forward. I think you're beautiful. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met, in more ways than one. And I think about what you asked me when you first arrived, and I want to give you that answer. I want to make you happy. I just don't know how. Ingrid set down her sewing slowly. Then let me teach you something, she said softly. May I? Yes, Jake breathed. She reached out with one large hand and gently cupped his face. Her palm was warm and rough from work, and Jake leaned into the touch involuntarily. In Norway, we have a saying. Små grytor har också öron. It means small pots also have ears. It means size does not determine worth or capability. That's real wise, Jake managed to say, acutely aware of how fast his heart was beating. You are not too small for me, Jake Thornton. And I am not too big for you. We are exactly right for each other. Do you believe this? Did he? Jake looked into those ice blue eyes and realized that somewhere over the past week, his fear had transformed into something else entirely. Something warm and urgent that made his whole body feel alive. I'm starting to, he admitted. Good. Then I will teach you our first lesson. She leaned down slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and pressed her lips to his. Jake's first kiss was nothing like he'd imagined from the dime novels he'd secretly read. It wasn't flowery or poetic. It was warm and real and slightly awkward because he didn't quite know what to do with his mouth. But Ingrid was patient, gentle, guiding him without words. Her lips were soft despite her hard exterior, and when she deepened the kiss just slightly, Jake felt his knees go weak. When they finally parted, Jake was breathing hard. Was I terrible at it? Ingrid laughed, a deep rich sound that made something in Jake's chest expand with joy. You were perfect. Because you tried. Because you wanted to. That is all that matters. From that night forward, everything changed. They started sitting closer together. Jake would take her hand while they walked the property. Ingrid would rest her head on his shoulder while they sat by the fire in the evenings, even though she had to bend awkwardly to do so. And slowly, carefully, they began exploring what it meant to be husband and wife in truth, not just on paper. Ingrid taught Jake that desire wasn't about experience or technique. It was about attention, about caring for your partner's pleasure as much as your own. It was about communication and patience and sometimes laughing when things didn't go quite right. Jake learned that his size compared to hers didn't matter the way he'd feared. In fact, Ingrid seemed to delight in his gentleness, in the way he approached her with reverence rather than the rough handling she'd feared all her life. She taught him where to touch her, how to read the sounds she made, what made her breath catch in her throat. It took them weeks of careful exploration before they finally came together fully as husband and wife. And when they did, in the big bedroom that had become theirs, it was nothing like Jake had feared. Ingrid was careful with her strength, and Jake was attentive and eager to please. They figured it out together, two inexperienced souls learning the ancient dance for the first time. 3 months into their marriage, Jake had never been happier. But happiness, he was learning, didn't exist in a vacuum. The wider world always had opinions. It started small. Whispers at the general store when Ingrid came to town. Stares from the church ladies. Jake noticed that people would cross to the other side of the street when they saw Ingrid coming, the same way they might avoid a dangerous animal. The real trouble started when they attended Sunday service together. Reverend Patterson was a hard man who believed in a hard God, and he'd made his views on what he called unnatural unions very clear from the pulpit. When Jake and Ingrid walked into the church that morning, the entire congregation fell silent. They took a seat in the back pew, which groaned under Ingrid's weight. Jake could feel every eye on them, could hear the whispers starting up like rustling leaves. Ingrid kept her head high, but Jake saw her hands trembling slightly in her lap. He reached over and took one of her hands in both of his, squeezing it reassuringly. The sermon that morning was pointed and cruel. Reverend Patterson spoke about the sin of pride, about how some people thought they were above God's natural order. He talked about the importance of suitable marriages between suitable people. He never said Jake and Ingrid's names, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. After the service, as they were leaving, Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Dusty Creek, blocked their path. She was a small, pinched woman with a voice like a rusty hinge. "I don't know what kind of shameful situation you've created, Jake Thornton," she said loudly enough for the entire churchyard to hear, "but bringing this creature into our community is an affront to decent people." Something in Jake snapped. He'd been raised to respect his elders, to turn the other cheek, to avoid confrontation. But hearing this bitter woman call his wife a creature unleashed something protective and fierce in him. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice steady and cold, "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." The woman blinked, surprised. "I beg your pardon? My wife is twice the person you are. She's kinder, works harder, and doesn't spend her days spreading poison disguised as piety. If you can't treat her with respect, then I suggest you stay clear of both of us." Mrs. Henderson's face turned purple. "How dare you speak to me that way? I have lived in this town for 40 years and I will not be." "You will not be disrespecting my wife," Jake cut her off. "Not now. Not ever." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the shy, awkward Jake Thornton everyone knew. This was a man defending what was his, and the transformation was startling. Mayor Henderson stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker. "Now Jake, my wife meant no harm. It's just that folks around here aren't used to seeing such unusual arrangements. Maybe it would be better if your wife stayed home on Sundays." "No," Ingrid said suddenly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. She stood to her full height, and people actually took steps backward. "I will not hide. I have hidden my whole life in Norway, made myself small even though I am big, tried to disappear so others would be comfortable. No more. I am Jake's wife. I am a member of this community. I have done nothing wrong except be born different." "Now see here," the mayor started, but Ingrid wasn't finished. "In 3 months, I have repaired water pumps for 3 families who could not afford to hire help. I have helped deliver Mrs. Tucker's baby when the doctor could not come in time. I have pulled Mr. Chen's wagon from the mud when his horse could not. I ask nothing in return. I only want to live in peace with my husband. If you cannot accept this, then the problem is yours, not mine." The silence that followed was absolute. People looked at each other uncertainly. It was true that Ingrid had been quietly helpful around town, and several people owed her debts of gratitude they'd been content to ignore when it was convenient. Old Man Tucker stepped forward. He was a respected rancher who'd been in Dusty Creek since before it had a name. "The girl's right," he said gruffly. "She saved my daughter and grandson when things went bad with the birthing. Far as I'm concerned, anyone who has a problem with her can take it up with me." One by one, other voices joined in. Not everyone, but enough. Mrs. Chen. The blacksmith. Young Tommy Reeves, who Ingrid had taught to read during the slow afternoons at the general store. A small coalition of decent people who'd seen beyond the surface to who Ingrid really was. Mrs. Henderson huffed indignantly and stalked away, dragging her embarrassed husband with her. Reverend Patterson looked like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. The crowd slowly dispersed, and Jake and Ingrid walked back to their wagon. Once they were out of town, Ingrid finally let out the breath she'd been holding. "That was terrifying," she admitted. "You were incredible," Jake said with genuine awe. "I've never seen anything like it." "I learned from you," Ingrid said, taking his hand. "You stood up for me first. You showed me how to be brave." Jake shook his head. "No, you were always brave. You just needed a reason to stop hiding it." As they rode home together, Jake realized something important. Love wasn't just about the private moments, the intimacy and tenderness they discovered in each other. Love was also about standing together against a world that didn't understand. It was about choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard. And he would choose Ingrid every time. 6 months after Ingrid arrived in Dusty Creek, Jake woke to find her side of the bed empty. He panicked for a moment before hearing sounds from outside. He dressed quickly and went to find her. She was in the pasture, sitting in the grass watching the sunrise. Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked peaceful in a way he'd never seen before. He walked over and sat beside her, though he had to look up at her even when they were both sitting. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I was thinking," she said softly, "about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was alone in Norway, convinced I would die alone and unwanted. Now I am here. With you." Jake took her hand. "Do you regret coming?" "No," she said immediately. "Never. But I was thinking about your question. The one I asked you when I first arrived." Jake remembered that day vividly. "Can you make me come?" "Yes. I asked you to make me come to this ranch and feel like a real woman. To feel pleasure. To feel loved." She turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I need you to know that you have done all of this. You have given me everything I asked for and more. You have made me feel beautiful when I thought I was a monster. You have made me feel desired when I thought I was undesirable. You have made me feel loved when I thought love was impossible for someone like me." Jake felt his own eyes getting wet. "You've done the same for me, Ingrid. Before you came, I was just going through the motions of living. You taught me what it means to really be alive. To be brave. To stand up for what matters." "Then we have both come home," Ingrid said. "Not to a place, but to each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Finally, Jake spoke again. "I have something to tell you," he said nervously. "I've been saving up money. I want to expand the ranch, maybe hire some help. But more importantly, I want to build you something special. A workshop of your own, where you can do your mechanical work. I've seen how much you love fixing things, building things. You should have a proper place for it." Ingrid's face lit up with joy. "You would do this for me?" "I'd do anything for you," Jake said simply. "You're my wife. My partner. My best friend. I love you, Ingrid Thornton." It was the first time he'd said those words out loud, and they hung in the morning air like a benediction. Ingrid made a small sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled him into a fierce hug, lifting him right off the ground. "I love you too, Jake. So very much." She set him down carefully, and they kissed in the morning light, two people who'd found in each other what the world had told them they'd never have. Later that day, Jake took Ingrid into town. Not to hide, not to apologize, but simply to live their lives. They stopped at the general store for supplies. They waved at friendly faces and ignored unfriendly ones. They existed openly and unapologetically as husband and wife. At the land office, Jake filed papers to officially expand their ranch property. The clerk, a young man named Timothy, processed the paperwork efficiently. "Heard you folks are doing real well out there," he said conversationally. "My brother was thinking of asking if you needed ranch hands. Said Mrs. Thornton knows more about fixing machinery than anyone has ever met." "We might at that," Jake said, feeling proud. "Tell him to come by next week and we'll talk." As they loaded their supplies onto the wagon, Old Man Tucker stopped by. "Jake, Ingrid," he nodded to them both. "My daughter Sarah wanted me to invite you folks to dinner next Sunday. She wants to properly thank Ingrid for saving her life, and she'd like little Daniel to know the woman who brought him into this world." Ingrid's face flushed with pleasure. "We would be honored." As they drove home, Jake noticed Ingrid was crying again, but they were happy tears this time. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I have been invited to dinner," she said wonderingly. "As a guest. As a person. Do you know how many years I waited for someone to want me at their table?" Jake had to pull the wagon over because his own eyes were too blurry to see the road properly. They held each other right there on the dusty road, two souls who'd found their home in each other. That night, in their bedroom, they made love with a tenderness and passion born of deep love rather than simple desire. Jake had learned every inch of his wife's body, knew every sound she made, understood exactly how to bring her pleasure. And Ingrid had taught him that strength and gentleness could coexist, that being careful with someone wasn't the same as being afraid of them. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Ingrid traced patterns on Jake's chest with one large finger. "Do you remember when I first arrived and asked if you could make me come to this ranch and feel like a real woman?" "Of course," Jake murmured sleepily. "I have been thinking about this question. It was wrong question to ask." Jake propped himself up on one elbow, concerned. "What do you mean?" "I asked if you could make me feel these things. But the truth is, you did not make me feel anything. You gave me the safety and love to finally feel what was always inside me. You did not make me real. You helped me realize I was always real. I just needed someone to see me." She looked at him with those ice blue eyes that had become his whole world. "Do you understand?" Jake did understand. He understood that love wasn't about changing someone or completing them like they were incomplete. Love was about seeing someone exactly as they were and choosing them anyway. It was about creating a safe space where two people could be their fullest, truest selves. "I see you, Ingrid," he said softly. "And you see me. That's what makes this work." "Yes," she agreed, pulling him close. "We see each other. And we are home." Outside, the Texas stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small ranch below where two unlikely souls had found exactly what they were looking for. The mail-order bride from Norway and the virgin cowboy from Texas had built something real together, something that would outlast the gossip and judgment of small minds. They had come home to each other, and that was all that mattered. The end.